Welcome, everyone. We'll just give it a few moments for people to join. I already have people trickling in, which is great. We'll start in just a moment or two. More people are coming. That's fantastic. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, I think we can get started. And I think more people are coming in still, but we can at least welcome everyone. And thank you for joining us for the second in the CLARE webinar series. My name is Suzanne Carter, and I head up the CLARE Research for Impact Hub, which is based at South South North in Cape Town. We are, as CLARE, a framework research program on climate adaptation and resilience, working to enable socially inclusive and sustainable action to build resilience to climate change and natural hazards in Africa and Asia Pacific. CLARE is jointly designed and run by the United Kingdom's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and Canada's International Development Research Centre. This CLARE webinar series, if you can go to the next slide, please, is running from May to November this year. And we have over 30 research projects that make up CLARE. The community will be sharing their insights and learning on a range of different topics to advance thought leadership, to champion co-creation, and to center Southern voices is the aims of this webinar series. Today's webinar is one of two that will be focused on co-creation labs, with the second session happening on the 29th of June. So I hope you can join us for the second half as well. After a quick introduction from myself on what the lab approaches are under CLARE, we'll hear from three different projects, which will be sharing their experiences and learning about how they're linking about how each of their labs is contributing to specific characteristics of what we find common across all of these labs. And we'll end off with a panel discussion on sustainability of labs and what can be done to ensure a lasting legacy and impact. We invite you to subscribe to the CLARE newsletter, and we'll put the link in the chat. There's also a LinkedIn that you can follow to find out about the latest updates. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide, please. So here's just a quick overview of the agenda. The welcome that was with me and the scene setter. Three fantastic presentations, which will be about 15 minutes each. The first one is from Rana Wahid from the Recover Project, where every voice is heard. The second will be from Gilbert Sayami from the Tua Pamoja and Mechanics Project, looking at how these labs are taking an experimental approach. And then lastly, we'll have Imogen Bellwood-Harwood, supported by Shruti Jain, on covering Clarity's work on working towards systems transformation. And then, as I mentioned, we'll discuss in the panel about sustaining impact. So you can go to the next slide, please. So I often get asked, what are co-creation labs? It is a fairly new term in terms of the literature, but we found this to be the one that covers the most breadth in terms of the different labs approaches that are happening. And co-creation labs involve working in a collaborative way to surface new ideas that can solve a particular problem. We draw on a range of different stakeholders to share ideas, and trust building is central to these spaces to allow for learning, exploration, and reflection, where we value different knowledge types and lived experiences, and we move away from an expert-led model of engagement in research. But go to the next slide, please. In CLARE, we have labs in 16 countries, and in some of those, more than one in that particular country. So it's a very large pool of experience that we've been very lucky to draw from. These labs are not all the same. They come with very different names. So some are called living labs, learning labs, transformational labs, real-world labs. But in essence, they all have some essential ingredients, and that makes them very special spaces for co-creation to thrive. If we can go to the next slide, please. So last year, we came up with a community of practice for CLARE where we characterized 8 things that we think cut across all of these different labs. And these are the 8 characters that we came up with. The first is where every voice is heard. The second, where collaboration is a central aim. The third, working towards systems transformation. Encouraging co-learning, enabling transdisciplinary participation, taking an experimental approach, ensuring research has a sustainable impact, and allowing context-specific issues to be explored. So today we'll touch on 4 of those characteristics through the presentations and the discussion. In part 2, on the 29th of June, we'll be covering the other 4 characteristics. But right now, we'd like to go to a mentee to hear a bit from you about what you are thinking about co-creation labs. This is just to get a quick sense of how familiar you might be with co-creation labs. Is this your first time hearing about it, or something you're very well familiar with? And also to give us a bit of feedback on what you think of the characteristics we've come up with. You can join us on menti.com or scan the QR code to give us your feedback. And you're also very welcome to let us know about what about co-creation labs you'd like to learn more about. We might not get to be answering all of those questions today, but we'll use that to help us structure the final session as well. So if we go over to the Menti, please. And the first question, more yeses than nos so far in terms of being part of a co-creation lab. That's great. Lots of knowledgeable people in the room. I see many of the names are from the CLARE projects and programs as well. I also see new names, which is exciting. Give that just another moment. And then maybe if you can move to the next slide, or the next question, sorry. Which of these 8 characteristics resonate with the lab's work that you've been involved? And you can pick all that apply if you are ready to do that. So just as a reminder, the first one is where every voice is heard, and that's the one that Ranil will be speaking to today. Gilbert will be speaking about taking an experimental approach, and Imogen will be speaking to working towards systems transformation. But yes, looks like collaborating as a central aim is number 1 at the moment, and followed by allowing context-specific issues to be explored. Fantastic. Let's see if that changes a little bit, giving people a bit longer. And I still see lots of people still coming in. So welcome to those who have just joining us. We're just getting started. I've introduced what co-creation labs are all about, and we are doing a Menti right now to just get a bit of a sense of the people in the room and what you all think. Yes, we can share the Menti code in the chat. If you could do that, please, Adele. So it looks like, yeah, the trend is continuing, that collaboration is a central aim, and allowing context-specific the first 2, and then encouraging co-learning, evening out there. So that's great. I'm not going to look at the last question now, but I will take a look at those responses while we're in discussions to see if we can weave any of that into the discussion later, or we will take it up in the next webinar. But please do share your thoughts on what you'd like to know more about in terms of co-creation labs. All right, I think then I'm going to ask us to put up the slides again. And we can hand over to our very first speaker, who's Rana Wahid, and she'll be talking about what the Recover project is doing in the Maldives. Over to you, Rana.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon and good evening from wherever you are joining. Today, I will share our experiences from the Recover project in the Maldives and how we used a real-world lab approach to ensure that communities most affected by water insecurity were not simply consulted, but actively involved in shaping the solutions as well. Next slide, please. I think we can go over to the next one as well. Yeah. Our methodology actually relies on the real world labs. As I said before, we centered our research site in the Greater Mala region, which is around the capital city of the Maldives. Um, while this is a small island setting, it houses 40% of the entire national population, making it an incredibly high density urban environment facing severe climate induced infrastructure stresses as well. So, our real world lab was intentionally structured across three collaborative phases. Phase one was co design, where we built collaborative research questions with community members from the people we were seeking to reach. And we conducted a 1.5 hour focus group pilot with 5 participants to refine our approach. Phase two was co-production, which involved participatory knowledge generation. We conducted 30 semi-structured interviews across 9 distinctive vulnerable groups and lasting from 30 to 45 minutes each. So phase three was co-evaluation, which brought together 27 participants for an intensive 6 hour multi-stakeholder deliberation forum, which linked community members directly with the policymakers. Our core guiding principle throughout the process was very simple: shift the paradigm to position vulnerable populations understandings as primary data, rather than viewing them as passive beneficiaries of externally designed interventions. Next slide, please. So, one of the biggest challenges in co-creation was ensuring that participation was genuinely inclusive. So, to make this truly equitable, we had to consciously map out who we were who we were speaking to, and remove structural barriers to their participation. So, we focused on 9 specific groups: persons with disabilities, low-income households, climate-affected communities, women, migrant workers, pregnant and lactating women, the elderly, small business owners, and guardians of children. And we recognized early that traditional engagement methods would exclude many of the people we wanted to hear from. And because many vulnerable groups face practical barriers that prevent them from participating in research or policy discussions as well. So we knew that simply asking people to show up to a university hall wouldn't work. So they faced challenges like lost wages, caregiving responsibilities, transportation barriers, and accessibility needs as well. So our response to that was proactively. We spent months building trust, met people in their own spaces, partnered with local NGOs who had already trusted relationships with these communities and were working within these communities to reach these insulated populations. And we conducted home-based interviews and offered flexible scheduling, provided travel cost reimbursements as well, and ensured all processes were physically and linguistically accessible. So, where people weren't speaking the local language, like migrant workers, we ensured that translation was available as well. So, and most importantly, we spend time building trust before asking people to contribute. And that was because inclusion, as we saw it, was cannot be achieved by inviting people into a room only. It is achieved concurrently by removing the barriers that prevent them from entering the room in the first place. So, next slide, please. So to ensure that every voice was heard, we used approaches that allowed participants to express their experiences in ways that went beyond conventional interviews. So we went through storytelling, dialogue, and also photo vision activities. Photo vision was actually included after Claire conducted a photo elicitation and photo vision workshop for us. So yeah, so that was very well uh, accepted among the participants, and participants documented their own realities and reflected on challenges from their own perspectives. This shifted the power dynamic of the research process as well. So instead of researchers defining the problems beforehand, participants helped define what mattered most and how these issues should be understood as well. So next slide, please. So this was photos that were submitted by community members, which was showcased at the stakeholder forum where all the policymakers were present as well. Next slide, please. So the findings were not produced solely by the researchers. So four major themes emerged through collaborative analysis and were subsequently validated with both community members and policymakers together during the stakeholder forum. So this validation process was very critical because it ensured that interpretations reflected the community realities while also creating ownership among decision makers as well. So the stakeholder forum became a space where communities, policymakers, practitioners, and researchers could sit at the same table and collectively discuss solutions. We explicitly analyzed power dynamics from the start and used visual documentation and collaborative mapping to privilege different ways of knowing and treated validation as continuous co-creation rather than just checking accuracy. So we sent the information of the findings beforehand to policymakers to let them know these were the issues that were being discussed as well. And we recognize that gender, disability, economic status, and migration status intersect to create unique experiences of voter insecurity. So true inclusion meant changing how decisions get made and not just who gets consulted as well. Next slide, please. So the most important outcome was that community experiences directly informed policy recommendations, and together participants identified priorities around governance reform, infrastructure improvements, transparency, affordability, and climate resilience. So the resulting roadmap was not developed for communities, it was developed with communities. So this distinction is very important because solutions are often more practical, equitable, and sustainable when informed by those who experience the problem every day. Next slide, please. So this project also produced a master's dissertation that examined water security through a three-pillar justice framework. So that focused on distributional, procedural, and recognition justice. So the research demonstrated that water insecurity is not only about physical access to water, but also about those whose needs are recognized and whose voices influence these decisions. So what makes this research distinctive, I would say, is that the framework emerged from the experiences of the communities themselves rather than being imposed from existing policy assumptions. By centering vulnerable communities throughout the research process, the dissertation, I would say, contributes new evidence to climate adaptation and environmental justice scholarship, while enforcing the importance of participatory approaches in SIDS. Through the real-world lab approach, participants were not only contributors of data, but also helped shape how water security and climate vulnerability was understood. Next. So the outputs and impacts, I would say, to summarize the concrete impacts of the project, our real world stakeholder forum successfully brought community members and senior policymakers into the same room, and
Have we lost Rana, or is it just me? Yes.
we have yet to get back block. Sorry.
Sorry, I think mine just froze. I wasn't sure if everyone was still there. Okay, great.
Okay.
Carry on, please.
So our blog publication is on CLARE website and meant to raise international visibility for community-centered adaptation in the Maldives and sits, hopefully. And the master's dissertation contributes new academic evidence to the global climate adaptation and environmental justice space. However, the most meaningful impact was, I would say, beyond these outputs. The project amplified the voices of vulnerable communities in water governance discussions. I would say it strengthened collaboration between stakeholders and demonstrated that vulnerable populations should be recognized as partners in adaptation planning rather than recipients of policy decisions. So ultimately, this project showed that climate justice begins with communities. Uh, when communities have a genuine role in shaping decisions that affect their lives and making them essential partners in designing solutions. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, Rana, for being very good on time and giving us a whirlwind highlights package of the work that you're doing in the Maldives, which is just, yeah, really, really great, and that all the amazing policy impact you've already managed to achieve through your real world lab. I'm going to then hand over to Gilbert to take us through the next sort of characteristic, which is on taking an experimental approach. Gilbert works on multiple projects in CLARE, and so he'll give you a sense of that. And he's based at the University of Zambia. Over to Gilbert.
Great, thank you so much. Just build on what Rena has presented. Thank you so much, Rena, for the great work through co-creation, co-production, learning labs, deliver when they are grounded in realities, and that's what you really bring forward. And also when the participation ground is leveled, when some of the most powerful people in society can dialogue with some of the most vulnerable. That's great, and your case is very clear on that. And also the essence that exposure and failure and vulnerability often come from social technical failures. So great insights, and I build on those ideas in my next presentation. I participate in two CLARE projects, and so I speak from that background with the ideas shared not just as mine, but as participants from University of Cape Town, the Met Office, PHPZ, the Federation, and so many other people. So the wisdom does not lie entirely with me, but I draw from those collaborations. We've been doing co-production, implementing learning labs for the past 10 years. And we build from the Fractal project. And particularly in this project, we have implemented learning labs in the mechanics project and also activities in the Tuwe Pamoja project. Learning labs, in our view and in the way we've worked in Lusaka, we see them as taking a structured experimental approach to essentially provide space for rapid learning, for co-creation of ideas, coming up with possible implementation pathways that seek to address real-life problems and create impact. And so it has not just been learning. Our labs have created the opportunity to learn to address the problems rooted in the lived experience of the people. We've designed these spaces intentionally so that stakeholders can test the ideas. They can develop and refine methods and tools for learning and for behavioral change. This includes spaces where physical climate science and lived experience on floods is shared, and neither of the two is superior to the other. Ideas and knowledge and learning seek to inform and support change in both the way people encounter floods, but also in the way they encounter water scarcity, and then cast learning back into the physical climate science work, especially in moments when the evidence doesn't seem to align. And those spaces where sometimes discomfort can emerge if what people have known as the reality and then another line of evidence seems to show otherwise. That is the moment, that's an aha moment for saying, oh, what is happening here? Is this where we are missing in terms of adaptation efforts and so on? And that's why behavioral change comes in. So really, it's a process designed for adaptive learning when people feel comfortable and when they feel uncomfortable. Sometimes when people feel threatened based on what they know. But the key is that that's a safe space and people can freely engage with their vulnerabilities in terms of their base. We emphasize iteration, experimentation, and real-time feedback. This is not just for physical science work. This is not just for adaptation policy, decision-making policy experts. This is not just people from the community's lived experience. This is everyone feedbacking on each other and trying to find the best approach to addressing the problem, the best approach to enable knowledge to inform decision-making. And so really what we've seen over the years and in the two project is that through iterative processes, through increased trust, through increased confidence in multiple lines of evidence, and then moving towards integrated evidence through the labs, we've seen increased uptake of evidence in decision-making. We've seen reliance on the work that we've been doing when people are designing how to best manage waste in the communities. When people are preparing for December, November, when floods are projected to happen, we've seen uptake of that information. We've seen communities step up and say, we are not just going to be describing ourselves as the most vulnerable. We're the most vulnerable and we're in front in finding a solution. And so that shift has happened because there is trust and people feel safe in discussion around the topics that we deal with. And you can see the methods that we use. That's a rope. We're playing a game there where everybody's trying to identify themselves as a solution, but also as a problem, either preventing information that may not be heard, or receiving information, not acting on it, or being too far away from the community and can't be reached, or designing a solution by disaster management and education unit without involving the local council. So we see ourselves really as part of the web. Next, please. Really, why do we take an experimental approach in our labs? First, labs provide shared understanding on issues that concern vulnerability. We mostly work in informal settlements, vulnerability around flooding or too much water, too little water. And that shared understanding is the basis for trust, is the space for beginning to listen to each other more deeply and appreciate our limitations, as well as our capacities on what can be done. And building trust, what we've seen in our labs, in our learning labs, is that building trust takes time. It takes patience, it takes understanding, it takes empathy. And labs really have proved to us that if we really work together, we really accommodate each other's knowledge or knowledges, and we understand people's vulnerabilities and positionality with regards to the vulnerability, exposure, or limitations, service delivery, we could chart a path out of that space of failure to invest appropriately. And the labs have been, through that process, have been able to enable collaborative experimentation. It's not just the community, it's not just the city, it's everybody experimenting together. And because of that, we've seen reduced risk for maladaptation. The push has been a lot to do with concrete jungles in the city, do drainages. But then those drainages become dump sites by the community. And we've been able to reflect hard on why a $300 million investment has minimally reduced risk exposure to floods. And when we talk of nature-based solutions as a solution, addressing multiple problems of food insecurity, of heat exposure, and so on, we see transition in the way the city formulates its policies. We see the city asking for a local area plan that anchors on urban renaturing. And then we see behavioral change in those processes. This is a process that takes trust in order to be understood, especially if we're doing solutions that are new to the context. And so we've seen strengthened cross-sector collaboration where government, communities, researchers seem to understand each other better. A bit of solution on different understanding and appreciation of risk, but also terminology. When it's adaptation, mitigation, we see convergence on terms that we describe in the process, taking climate literacy very seriously. And we've seen that really come out quite clear in our work. And because of that shared understanding, shared trust, and shared sense of priority on what needs to happen, we've seen support, towards systems thinking. That's not just the drains that to solve the problem. It's not just garbage picked that to solve the problem. Problems are occurring because of socio-technical failures, including political failures in the whole process. And so really, we've seen improved uptake of innovations. For example, very clear examples of nature-based solutions being trialed and being implemented. Clearly, having climate resilient development pathways, CRDPs that center NBS. Clearly seeing the importance of integrating evidence, lived experience, climate science analysis, how the two align or converge or fail to align, and what that really means in terms of policy. We've seen all that coming nicely together. And you see the community here trying to tease out in the profiling tool how we can center NBS and climate in a tool that has been used for many years, but there was nothing on climate. This is a community coming to say, look, we can learn better by adding this and that. And people can listen, experts can listen. It's because we've taken time to experiment on ideas, experiment on terms, experiment on how to build trust and confidence, and how to question our own knowledge and our personalities. Next, please. All right. So really, when designing such labs, what have we seen in our work? Key is to ensure that a learning lab is anchored in clear structure, careful facilitation, and embedded in real-world relevance. In our case, it has been water insecurity. We're in a context where communities experience too much water and too little water, sometimes season after season, and sometimes within a season. And so we embed our learning labs in that context. And by so doing, we are relevant to the stakeholders. There's a reason why they need to come to the lab. There's a reason why they need to come and present. There's a reason they're looking for solutions that can work. And so while theory and concepts are important, our labs in Lusaka are very humble. They engage with lived reality. Second is that we articulate very clearly the problem anchored in the local context. Without sounding sensational, we are grounded in what really are the concerns and worries of the stakeholders and how a lab can offer an opportunity for reflection and finding solutions to some of those concerns. We draw on diverse participants representing lived experience and institutional authority, city council, national government. For institutional and government systems, we engage in a multi-level way, from national to the lowest structure, the World Development Committee, which is a government structure, but embedded in the community. But we go further, faith-based organizations, service providers, private sector. We really draw on several stakeholders. And the key here is that we exercise in our labs a deep sense of awareness, on the importance, but as well as the dangers of appreciating diversity and difference. That's language, literacy, power, privilege, interests, body language, and representation. And I must emphasize, appreciating difference and diversity and how to engage with it, there lies in the success of effective facilitation and ensuring that people feel at home and they don't feel threatened by either language or by their interest being threatened. So that's very, very key. And we've seen that really as a structuring element for success. And in there lies in the importance of appreciating that all knowledge matters. Lived experience, indigenous knowledge, scientific evidence, social science, decision makers. A counselor's 10-year experience in the chambers, his or her voice matters a lot. Just as an old mother who has lived in a flood-prone area for 30, 40 years, similar to a climate scientist who has spent all the years analyzing climate models and generating information that could be used for decision making. All that is important. Even when convergence does not occur, it is very important. And what we see here is the need to bridge difference by use of creative methods. How do you really listen to all the diverse perspectives? It's by use of creative methods, including storytelling, which we've been able to use, role play, hot seat sessions, where city council director for housing is put and asked questions by the community. Not to criticize, but to identify where the bottlenecks are in terms of improving drainage, in terms of getting garbage collected and well managed. We've used games, we've used music by young people, and we've used group discussions. And all these methods have been able to facilitate collaboration in real time. Solicit for feedback in real time on issues that may be contentious, but also allow people to learn and in a relaxed environment. And we've really invested after using all these methods again on invested in hands-on activities like creating a pathway for what needs to happen and the timeline. Testing ideas on how communication should happen in order that the community is able to receive information in real time and receive information in time for them to make decisions. And so we've seen all this come out quite nicely. But on this slide, if I may say one point, is appreciating diversity and difference and coming up with methods that are creative enough to converge ideas and tease out the differences and question why the differences in people's experiences and what that really means in terms of designing intervention that can work on the ground. Next. Co-designing labs for societal impact. It's not just learning. Our labs learn, and since they're embedded in real life situations, lived realities and practical problems or practical projects on the ground, we move on to sort of say, what should Lusaka City Council do after this lab? And impact really, in terms of generating impact, we see it in our labs that it comes from intentional design, clear facilitation, and a clear program while remaining flexible, and a clear plan to follow through the process, and also go beyond the lab. After the lab, so what? And then start, in our view, we've been able to start with a clear learning question and a clear challenge. For example, some of the questions we've asked, why early warning is rarely reaching the community? And when it reaches the community, why is the community rarely responding? Another question is that we work in contexts which have recorded flooding far back in the 80s, for whatever reasons. And people are born there. We ask questions, why people continue to live in flood, prone areas, even when they know they'll be flooded next year. These may sound rhetorical and simple, but in our labs, when we tease out that, when we build evidence from lived experience surveys, climate modeling work, urban development, and urban expansion analysis, you can begin to see why we experience the problems that we experience. And those things cannot be uncovered in a conventional learning process of make a survey or quantitative analysis or climate work. It gets uncovered, those messy, complex questions, why people continue to experience, live in areas that are vulnerable, and they have known them for many years. Simple as it may sound, it's super complex. So starting with a clear question helps to structure the lab process. Co-design the agenda with key stakeholders. It is not about UNZA or UCT or Met Office. We work together to design the tool, and the ward counselor is often consulted. And then we use real data, real cases, real drainage infrastructures, real green spaces that are being tried, real river channels in the urban space, and real buildings that we see, and try to tease out this as a learning case. And so in so doing, we're able to engage with the real constraints and real opportunities on the ground. We build in gender equality and social inclusion. Disability is part of our conversation, and we see that as very important. If we say vulnerable people, in that vulnerable population, we dissect who is most vulnerable and why. Women with disabilities, with a bit of assets, and so on. So we deploy quite a lot intersectionality lens here in order to understand, gendered and the social related issues that make people get exposed differently to floods and sometimes drought. And we end with clear commitments. What is next for each lab? What are the pilots that we're going to do? What are the roles of institutions? And what are the timelines? For example, one of the labs in the mechanics, when we're ending, we said, we've learned a lot. The community have taken a higher level of responsibility that they are also a solution, and they want to demonstrate that. So they went on using local resources. Thank you so much. Using local resources to actually go and formulate strategy plans for them to minimize, improve garbage management, and therefore block drainages. And by the time we're having rain season in 2026, more rain than many other years, the risk for flooding was much, much less. And we're able to articulate clearly the impact that these projects are causing or creating on the ground. Then finally, apart from following up and remaining true to the process, we capture insights for scaling for policy influence. And some of these include the need to actually formulate some strategies that are embedded embed these insights in the city strategies, like the integrated development plan, the local area plans, which the cities begin to formulate based on some of these processes. And so really the question here, labs need to map who takes what forward and who accounts to who and who reports to who, so that they don't just remain a talk show. They're important for learning, but learning that actually transitions from learning to doing to impact, and creating the change that is deepened in policy, in practices, in behaviors. This is what we've been able to see in Lusaka. I think this is my last slide. Thank you so much. I end here.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. That was fantastic, and really great to see how yours and Rana's sort of complement each other, and really how nuanced and particular you need to be in thinking through all the small details to make sure that people feel included, people have the agency, people really feel that they matter, and that there's trust in the process. I think there's a question in the chat that if either of the previous two presenters want to respond to, I think, yeah, just asking sort of how that concept of knowledge matters, that knowledge from all matters, helps to build trust and the long-term partnership. So maybe if you want to make a comment on that in the chat, that'd be fantastic. I'm now going to hand over to Imogen, who's going to talk about the Clarity project and how they are working towards systems transformation, which is one of the other characteristics. So over to Imogen and Shruti.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm reporting on the Clarity project, climate adaptation and resilience in tropical drylands. And our project is working through what we're calling transformation labs in 4 different contexts, working in 2 locations in India, in Karnataka, which is Raichur and Chintamani, one a little bit more urban, one more rural. and we're working around Dodoma in a more urban biased landscape in Tanzania, and then also in a transboundary location across the border of Niger and Nigeria, two regions, Maradi and Katsina, again, some with some urban, some with some rural characteristics. So within each of our transformation labs, research teams are working with stakeholders, and that includes water users, including farmers and urban water users, local leaders and policymakers, to imagine different pathways of water use in the context of climate change that are happening in these tropical drylands. Our pathways are imagined as trajectories into the future of water use, water policy, water practice, and each pathway of water use is associated with different development visions. Some of these visions really imply transformation of landscapes and livelihoods. And in Clarity, we have a strong focus on groundwater and the ways that groundwater could be used in ways that might be different to the current context, recognizing particularly the potential of groundwater as a water source, but also one that has specific challenges to do with pollution, to do with its relative invisibility to water users and potentially policy actors. So each of our transformation labs has developed their pathways with various levels of input from the different stakeholders mentioned, and some implications of the different pathways are inherent in the way they're described. So some are involving moves to different crops, maybe different livelihood options, but some of the implications of the pathways are less visible. And so we're relying on a lot of hydrogeological modeling to make some of the water and physical implications of different ways of using water more visible to the stakeholders. So through this combination of natural and social science, Clarity aims to make the implications of different ways of using resources in different climate situations clearer to a variety of stakeholders, and then to collect their views on each to help the stakeholders and all of the participants in the lab deliberate on the advantages and disadvantages of different futures, different ways of using water in different so-called pathways. So overall, we're aiming in these labs to bridge the gaps between research and policy and practice by providing routes for those scientifically informed information and data to find our way towards people for whom they're useful, and also ways that stakeholders can articulate their needs for information to make decisions and to engage with each other in a more evidence-informed way towards deliberation. Another really important aspect of the T-Labs is something that's been mentioned earlier today already, is that it's supposed to enhance transformations that aren't led by the elite because they foreground the voices of all relevant stakeholders in the context, including marginalized people. And due to this, is that the pathways have tended to show the coexistence of emergent ideas and innovative ideas and existing practice that already happens, such as diversified cropping systems, managed aquifer recharge processes, and processes of accessing water from very low-tech, shallow hand-dug wells, alongside the more dominant pathways and maybe high-tech pathways that sometimes dominate in policy, like increased use of surface water sources, large-scale infrastructure, increased drilling of wells of different depths, and pumping groundwater. Okay. So I think we can change the slide. Can we change through 2 slides, please? Thanks. Thank you. So just a kind of a note on our maybe our framework. I've been using the word pathways, and in Clarity, we wanted to reconcile our idea of pathways with the T-Lab methods, because they complement each other, because both of them recognize that systems are really complex, comprising the interactions between social components and physical components, natural components, and also the way that we understand those. Our starting point for the idea of pathways was the ESRC's step center notion of pathways as trajectories of change that have social, technological, environmental, political dimensions to them. But we needed a version of this that centers water, but also acknowledges how it's embedded in social political contexts. So we've decided to work with the idea of hydrosocial pathways to represent the interdisciplinary and the transdisciplinary way that we're imagining these ways of using water into the future. And we're focusing as the central theme practices of water and technologies to do with those practices, but contextualizing that way of existing with water in its environmental, but also political, socioeconomic, and cultural context. So that's the hydro and the social dimension of our pathways. And this framework lets us integrate social science, hydrological science, modelling, climate modelling, and participatory research. And that in turn ensures that transformation isn't conceptualized just as a technical endeavour, but it's envisaged with all of its socio-political aspects and implications, many of which are not known and remain uncertain as people proceed down trajectories of change. So this image here is just representing, that different pathways of doing things, which in our project are to do with water, exist, and they have implications for different groups of people and influence different people differently. And as we go into the future, the implications of pathways actually become less clear. How they interact with each other becomes less clear. And in Clarity, we perceive that that's the role of the scientific data research that we're combining with stakeholder participation. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So from a more theoretical point of view, transformation does pose opportunities, but it's also risky. So for example, although some pathways might strengthen a certain livelihood activity, for example, other livelihood activities could potentially vanish or change drastically, with implications for people pursuing those livelihoods. And there are also implications for different resources. And there are inevitable trade-offs, therefore. And we've really seen that transformation labs provide the space for people to discuss the trade-offs that exist in different pathways and different options, and discuss how they might arrive at a more equitable, or the most possibly equitable route towards change. And sometimes these trade-offs are necessary to create longer-term sustainability. We have one of our T-labs in Raichur, Karnataka in India, and in that T-lab location, one of the dominant livelihoods is paddy cultivation, and there is a canal system and paddy cultivation at the head end of the canal system, where people have better access to water, is a really important livelihood option. But this pathway doesn't appear to be relatively equitable, because people at the tail end of the canal system who don't receive that much water, and people who are beyond the reach of the paddy system, don't have such lucrative livelihoods. And also this way of using water is having emergent environmental problems, issues with soil productivity and salinity. So the Raichur T-Lab group has come up with ideas of several other pathways. I'll give some examples in a minute, but one of them emphasizes more diversified cropping. And this could prove to be a transformative pathway, but it would involve a breakaway from this paddy-based livelihood that's currently providing one group of people with a much more lucrative way of cultivating agriculturally. Can we move to the next slide, please? So the Raichur T-Lab has engaged in community engagement continuously, really, and before this project has even started, in order to have these conversations about different livelihoods, different ways of using water in the landscape, with the aim that these conversations will create feedback loops back into decision making. And I want to give an example of one of the visioning workshops that was held in Clarity. Using the hydrosocial pathways notion as a framing tool, one of the visioning workshops enabled stakeholders to come out with various different pathways, and I'll put 3 of them here. One, and by the way, these pictures don't necessarily capture the whole of the pathways, they're just vignettes, if you like, just to sort of stylize them and characterize them. So 3 different ideas that participants in that particular workshop brainstormed were firstly urban pool and exit from agriculture. So you can see an image on the left presenting one aspect of that. Secondly, an idea of technology-driven agrarian transformation. So we have an idea in the middle based on that idea of ubiquitous and high technology. And then another labeled green transition with rural entrepreneurship. So the image on the right represents some entrepreneurs who might be using more local or maybe low-tech solutions to water use in their location. So in the workshop, each of these pathways was deliberated upon, and the participants identified winners and losers in each pathway. So, for example, in the picture at the top of the slide, the technology-driven situation, more people might be able to gain salaried employment, but this wasn't seen as a panacea, as sort of like an entirely positive transformation, because although the landscape might change entirely and many people's livelihoods might change entirely, this implies dependence upon some companies or employers that might not be able to sustain jobs over the long term. And there's an extra aspect of vulnerability for people who might get engaged as labourers. In the other two, the ones represented on the bottom of the screen, many of the households modelled would leave agriculture and maybe leave the location. And it would be, agriculture would become the preserve of fewer households, fewer livelihoods would be supported by agriculture. And that implies that the ones that left agriculture will have to bear the costs. It might have really negative consequences for them. If they have more resources, they might be able to bear the costs of retraining. So the point here is not really that one pathway is better than the others, or that there's one transformation that's the best, but the stakeholders should be able to discuss the pros and cons of different types of changes, different types of transformations for different groups, recognizing that there will always be trade-offs. And the question of whose advantage is prioritized is really important. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? I want to bring another learning that we've had from one of our other TLabs, and this is the one in West Africa across the Nigeria border. We've also observed that simply taking part in the Transformation Lab process can be transformative for some participants. So in this location, in Katsina, in Nigeria in particular, women are much less present in the public domain and haven't been so involved in decision-making about water beyond household level in this particular location. We have a method of community hydrology, sometimes called parahydrologists, in our TLabs, where community members have been trained on using different monitoring tools and collecting different forms of data. And in the community hydrology training in Katsina, Nigeria, for one of the sessions, 67% of participants were women, and women have been engaged consistently throughout the training process, which is unusual for that context. And this gives them the opportunity to have a more prominent and visible role, to the extent that it relates to data collection and knowledge about water. And that can give them more prominence and possibly more status in terms of their knowledge being recognized. This might seem like a really modest achievement, but it also means that they gain competency in talking about water, and their expertise in general is taken more seriously. And so the TLab's more able to instigate dialogues that consider their perspectives, both within the context of the TLab workshops, but then also more widely, beyond that, and in interactions between communities and local governance actors. But there are also trade-offs and risks in this. It seems like a modest achievement, but it's also something that a lot of thought has to be given to. So there are trade-offs and risks. Empowering women and increasing their visibility and potential power can come with perceptions that the relative power and authority maybe of men is diminished, or those with vested interests or existing and current roles of responsibility can be threatened by this. So this type of participatory and inclusive method needs to be managed in a way that emphasizes mutual benefits, whole of society benefits, and brings everybody on board and reduces risks to women participants in this particular case. Okay. So let's go to the next slide, please. So just the next steps for us, really. We're still at the stage where we're integrating our natural science results, our modelling results, into this TLAB space that has taken a lot of time to develop the trust and the full participation that's necessary. So a next step will be to share the outputs of models with the same stakeholders. So many of the groups in the TLABs are already familiar with the modelling process that has been going on, but we're at the stage now where we're able to share models that show the potential impacts of the different transformation pathways or different hydrosocial pathways, so that we can achieve that integration of different forms of knowledge that is informing the ongoing deliberations about the types of changes that people would like to see in their locations. And these modelling results are really important in terms of prompting conversations about equity and differential outcomes for different groups, because some of them are spatially aggregated. So we have two models called Stella and DRIP, and Stella on the left-hand side is less spatially aggregated, explicit, but DRIP on the right-hand side is entirely spatially explicit. And the sharing data from these different models will enable conversations about how different outcomes might occur for different people in different climate scenarios, and also different spatial locations under different pathways of water use in the various TLABs. I already hinted at the discussions that are ongoing and very central in Rijsje about the difference between the people who are at the head end, the tail end, and far away from the canal system that has existed there. So go to the last slide, please. And really, just in summary, I guess I'm going to echo something that was mentioned by both the previous speakers, which is that systems transformation requires really long-term work and building trust and capacity as its first step. And what we've seen in Clarity is that has taken a really a long time and a lot of work, but that's necessary before we start to have very open discussions and very well-informed discussions based on the types of physical science data that were represented in the previous slide. And we learned that there's a really critical role for all local actors, including NGOs, religious leaders, as well as the state officials and the water users that we want to engage with within the lab. And we also want them to continue engaging with each other after our lab has finished. And we think that our TLAB partners are probably well equipped to do that now, having worked for the long term in their situations, even before the Clarity project has started. And we're confident that they've built reflective and collaborative spaces where they can carry on this work, both at the end of the Clarity project and then probably into the future as well. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Imogen. And I think it just all the presentations have really built on each other, really making the case that every voice does matter, that we need to be more inclusive. We need to be thinking about things in a more holistic manner, because if we don't do that, we miss out on those key insights and the real dynamics of what's happening on the ground. And then I think, Gilbert's saying, be experimental, try different things, take risks, be more open to seeing what all the possibilities are in that beautiful trust space that you can create in these labs. And then Imogen, I think what I really picked up from what you were saying is that that there's really are trade-offs though. I mean, it's not to be underestimated that these things are not easy, and sometimes there are power imbalances, sometimes there are issues that come up in these processes. I think recognizing that labs processes aren't always very straightforward and easy. They're iterative, they take time, they take a lot of trust building to really get right. So thank you for giving us another perspective on that. I'm going to open the panel discussion at this point. And for this panel, we thought it'd be really nice to dive into the topic of what it takes to explore sustainability and impact. So these spaces we know from what's been coming out can really have amazing impact in terms of policy changes in the Maldives. For Gilbert, you've built on Fractal's work in the past. So this is a series of lab approaches that have culminated in really strong engagement in Lusaka. And for Clarity, you've worked in multiple countries, different kinds of issues on groundwater extraction, but and you're still in the write-ups phase. But I think you're all showing that this process has a richness, has a legacy, and has an ability to get a kind of impact that is very hard to see if you've just done sort of a stakeholder engagement. So what we're going to explore now is this question of, what can I ask each of you? Would you say would be the most important thing that you did early on that's now sort of paying its dividends, that's helping you to have set the groundwork up, that you can have this kind of this long-term process, long-term impact that you were hoping for? What was that magic sauce that helped you get the results that you and the impact that you're seeing now, where you're sort of 3 years into your lab? Do you want to start, Rana?
Yes, thank you. So for the Recover project, I would say the most important step was investing time in trust building before collecting the primary data, because even with some of the groups that we spoke with at first, there were consultations by the government, but they didn't see the change that they were expecting. So we recognize that trust could not just be assumed as well. So by meeting, they need to know that they are, the data that we collected from the labs would be meaningfully incorporated into any scientific output as well. So that trust, I think we achieved that by going to their, being very flexible while doing the project. So meeting people in their own communities, partnering with trusted NGOs, and designing participation around their needs as well. And we created conditions for genuine engagement. So I would also say that by incorporating the policy, for the policy brief that is going out, that the validation was done in the real stakeholder forum together with the policymakers, brought that trust for us as well. So I think that trust building is a very important step for them to come to the table as well, because
It's
there were
also
a lot of groups that were reluctant to be present in the forum, in the final forum with the policymakers. So I think trust building is the most important step for this.
So creating like a level playing field for that interaction to happen between vulnerable communities and government stakeholders. It is an
Yes.
unequal power balance that often exists or has historically existed. Would anyone else like to reflect on how you create that dynamic that those two very different communities can engage on a more equal footing?
Yes, I can add a few points. First, power is always present in the labs, and it requires a high sense of awareness that even when we work together, we are different and we have different backgrounds and different opportunities and privileges. And in certain contexts, it's a blame game between those that are mandated to deliver services and those that receive the services. And so what the labs have been able to do in trying to diffuse that historical tension and imbalance is really taking a long, and deeper investment in trying to understand what is exactly the root cause of the issues here. And when there's trust, which I think all of us have spoken about, and there's the open conversation, what we've seen is rather than people pointing fingers, people sort of and institutions tried to identify where their shortfall was and what the alternative could be. And when people take that sort of positive approach to identifying where they can do better and where they've done better and what they can learn from there, and using a language that can be understood, that in itself becomes a space where there can be dialogue in the room, and where the blame game is not about pointing fingers, but reflecting about where didn't I do better and where can I do better. And this moment requires trust. And apart from trust, what we've seen in the labs in Lusaka is also the relationship, building beyond the trust, begin to appreciate that there's a Gilbert in the university who understand and may begin to believe there's a counselor in the community who, when I call them, they know why I'm calling, that I add value to their work. So we need to go. In our case, we've seen the value of going beyond it. Trust is that foundation, but relationship building is important, because labs that we've been able to do in Lusaka largely started with trust, first shared understanding, trust, and now relationships. And that's very, very key. The second point I wanted to add is, what did we do differently? Is our labs were not anchored by the university or researchers. Our labs are anchored in the institutions in Lusaka. And so it's not me to facilitate all the time. Initially, it was the colleagues from University of Cape Town, Bettina, Chris, Jack, Alice, and others, when we just had this called Learning Lab. And it was a hard time for me to explain what a Learning Lab is, explain to a community that is expecting, when you say we have a project, they expect you to go and do a drainage infrastructure or drill a borehole. And there's no way doing a Learning Lab. What is this? It was a complete new language. But over time, the capacity was not just left with me from the colleagues across the world, but the community itself understands. The council can come, what development community can come and say, lab is rooted in them. They know it's a process that can lead to results, but in a way that is specific and structured. And so if there's something that I can say is a legacy thing that we know will outlive our work, is that labs are now a culture of working in our context, not just in the university. The third point is that makes, I think, this work to be sustainable beyond any funding cycle. And when CLARE funding comes to a close, what is it that will make this work continue? It's because, one, in our view and in our practical experience, is that we moved from knowledge generation, knowledge sharing, awareness raising, into action planning and local resourcing. And so I have no imagination whatsoever that come December, March next year, the community will forget that when you mobilize locally and clean the drainages, water flow, when you have a neighborhood watch that is able to enforce municipal regulations and report properly, and the reporting offices are variable and open, and there's an easy to use channel to engage, I've no doubt in my mind that this is a seed we've planted that will bear fruit for many years to come. It's because it's rooted in knowledge and in doing, and it's rooted in the community and in the local institutions. It's a culture, it's a new practice that is now living with the people and living with us. Yeah, that's the difference in ensuring sustainability beyond a particular project, beyond our projects. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Gilbert. That was really great. And I love that point that you made about sort of, moving from this knowledge awareness raising and moving more into sort of this more active, action orientated mindset, which I think, research wasn't always set up to do. And it may be uncomfortable for people, but it's moving into that space really and makes these lab processes so much more meaningful. Imogen and Shruti, do you want to jump in on other ingredients you see, or otherwise we can talk about other elements of sustaining legacy that you're picking up?
Do you want to mention anything, Shruti?
Yeah, I would like to say that there are two dimensions of our T-Labs approach, which have ensured that we can work towards a more sustainable and transformative change. First is that our approach remains enabling. We have focused on the landscape level in each of our T-Labs. We are talking about plural pathways and a combination of pathways in each landscape to enable stakeholders with contesting interests. For instance, Imogen mentioned that there's a head-end farmer and a tail-end farmer, canal infrastructure. So in this, space, they can come together and focus on solutions that would prove sustainable for all. And secondly, from early on, we have focused on policy change and alliance building in each of our T-Lab. There is a partnership with policymakers in each of the T-Lab. For instance, the Dodoma T-Lab is working closely with the Ministry of Water. Both the India T-Labs are working with the regional civil society organizations, the research and government bodies like the Advanced Center for Integrated Water Resource Management. among many others. Maradi Katsina Tea Lab is working with the Climate Change Council in Katsina and the Regional Directorate of Hydraulics and Sanitation in Maradi. In addition to these two approaches, the tea labs, especially the two India tea labs, Raichur and Chintamani tea labs, have combined research with rapid piloting of solutions. For instance, the pipe to field and lake rejuvenation pilots have already started showing results, where farmers who were earlier trapped in a canal lock-in are showing interest for taking up diversified crops. And the government has recognized their solutions as one that they are ready to support and collaborate on. I think one of the program that Imogen mentioned of training the community and para-hydrologists in all our tea labs. And there's a groundwater monitoring network that has developed in Maradi Katsina. These are interventions with long-term impacts, as these have increased agency among community members and institutions. They're using scientific methods. And we already have indications that the training is informing the decision makers. So I think building on, as Imogen had mentioned, that we've already built on the work of earlier organizations by partnership, and we are building on the relationships developed in previous project, and this work should continue.
Thanks so much, Shruti. And and so I love how the sort of the engagement of the citizen science approach, and how that really makes people feel invested in the process, that they're part of it. It's not the scientific process that's divorced from me. I'm part of it. I have a vested interest in this. It's a really powerful technique that your projects use to really drive that change in mindset and change in the form of interaction. I'm going to move on to another question that I had, which is, for each of you, what do you feel is the legacy that you're going to see left behind? What change on the ground has your lab led to, that, you would say this is the thing? I mean, maybe it hasn't completely materialized yet, but what is that impact, that change that you are seeing, that you go, this is why it was worth doing the lab approach, because it's resulted in this. Maybe you could each touch on that. Should we go to Rana first?
Sure. I would say that while we focused on embedding community perspectives into outputs that could continue influencing decision making even after the project ended, would be actually the policy brief, which would be a precedent set where co-creation has happened, and where we've taken the perspectives of communities. And this is not just one community as such, but we've engaged with 9 communities in the Maldives, and so that we've actually documented how each of these communities compound upon their challenges and how they adapt. This would be a foundational document that the government could go back to look at when they are and also to co-create again as well in the years to come. They could see this process as a way to be duplicated across multiple forums. So I think that would be a legacy that we have ensured for our lab in the Maldives. So more importantly, the legacy is also the relationships and the networks created between the communities, policymakers, researchers, and practitioners. And those connections provide a foundation for future collaboration beyond the lifespan of the project, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Rana. And over to Gilbert. And similar question, what is it that you see as like the thing that you're most proud of as the legacy of your lab?
So it will be more of a reflection. After the labs, we did the lab, and then the last lab for the mechanics project. And we were invited to discuss climate financing for Zambia. And the reflection that came from the ministries and many stakeholders is that what we've seen the labs deliver is that there is a near proof. We've proved that large scale, we've created a platform, an ecosystem of collaborators that really have a shared understanding of what the risk is, what the opportunities are, and we've demonstrated our capacity to move from learning to action. Action not funded by the project themselves, but funded by people that we've been able to bring to the table. And so what the ministry was saying is that this is the perfect time to put in forward a big grant to climate fund, international climate funding and so on, and prove that effective collaboration, especially getting the voice from the ground, is actually possible. And the labs have been able to actually demonstrate that large funds can tap into the example and the systems that Lusaka has created. We see that as a major transformative shift when it comes from like a permanent secretary. Then the other things that we've seen clearly, practically on in terms of in the sites we work, what will outlive us is we've been able to create climate resilient development pathways that are finding themselves in the local area plan that I was talking about. That will go in policy, and the pathways are crafted, drawing on lived experience and drawing on modeling work that has been done by climate scientists. We have an example where evidence from multiple sources is being used to inform strategy for development on the ground. That will outlive us. That is a legacy that we'll have for many years to come. And not just for us, but it is tackling things like garbage management, nurturing, drainage cleaning, and so on, with begin to grow food, appropriate urban agriculture happening. We see that tackling real life issues for the people. So changing lives is something that we will see and we've seen begin to take root in our work. So multiple levels, policy, real awakening in the policy space, but also practical set of DPs that are finding themselves in the instruments of the council. Thanks.
Thanks, Gilbert. I mean, I think this also speaks to some of the things that I've been thinking about, we're working on co-productions. And, we say something like, that you need to make sure there's a value add for everybody involved. Like they're not going to be part of this labs process if they don't feel like there's a value. So speaking to the policy, speaking to the implementation, speaking to community concerns, having that very holistic approach, is really core to making sure that it's a success. And
Yes.
difficult to balance, but you seem to have managed that really well. I mean, I think then I'm going to ask the Clarity team, would you like to further reflect on that point, or what other sort of legacy do you feel is being left behind from your lab?
Well, I might just say, this is going to be similar to the others. I think it's difficult, to point to concrete changes within the lifespan of one of these projects. So a theme that's come up between all of us is that many of the partners in these consortia have been working in these locations for a long time. And it's not just the CLARE project. In all these cases, it's not a unique standalone project. It's building on relationships and experiences that have been happening. So Gilbert mentioned, for example, for 10 years in their case. And I know the same is true for many of our partners. So the CLARE project in itself is part of the legacy of previous projects, and it means that over the longer term, the relationships with not just policy but also practice stakeholders act as a conduit through which many small changes can take place. I think a couple of concrete examples from Clarity, something that we are still facilitating, and it's been many years in the making, is better dialogue between the water agencies on each side within each country of our transboundary TLAB. So you have one TLAB that's working across the border of Niger and Nigeria, and it's really difficult to combine water release schedules, aquifer exploitation strategies, and so on across those different water agencies in the different countries, even though they do have a transboundary agency. So that will probably be one of the legacies of that TLAB, but it's not been just due to the work in this project, it's due to really long-term work over the long durée. Yeah, Shruti, do you want to add anything to that?
Not really. I think our partnerships and the collaborations are the legacy we are hoping they will continue.
I might also add as well something that was mentioned by both previous speakers as well. It's just the tradition, the habit, or the practice of working with data. So evidence-based decision making, I don't want to say decision making, deliberation, evidence-based deliberation to become a norm. This is a really important legacy as well.
That's great. So, I mean, I think a lot of what is coming out in common is this relational legacy that is left behind after the project. So people know who to talk to, then they have a better sense of what each other need. They're able to communicate in a more constructive way. They're able to work together on hopefully implementation or, moving towards more constructive ways forward. So yeah, I think that's been really a key message that's come through today. I did see there was a question in the chat which Ariane has just replied to, so I'm glad that Ariane was able to manage that one. But basically, was just asking to our funders, FCDO and IDRC, the difficulty of these kinds of lab approaches in terms of not being sure what you're paying for in terms of the impact, because they are by their nature an evolving, emerging process. And so it's harder to so yeah. But Ariane has very helpfully given a thing here. But I mean, I think we've been very lucky with our funders as the CLARE projects to have funders who really appreciate the fact that we might not know all the answers going in, but working in this more collaborative style is more likely to give us the impact that we want than following this, the old traditional pathways of researchers do research in isolation and don't involve people in a meaningful way besides, extractive stakeholder engagement and validation of results. So this is really moving to a very different kind of engagement. But yes, there are risks, and the funders have been very, alive to that we're sometimes not sure what we're going to get on the other side. But there's a richness to that process that you can't get from sort of a traditional research approach. And the CLARE program was designed based on the adaptation research for impact principles that were developed by ARA to take transdisciplinarity seriously, to make sure that equity considerations are foregrounded. And so all of those 6 principles in the ARA are actually kind of embedded in what co-creation labs do. And I think that's why we have so many co-creation labs in across CLARE. I'm going to ask for just the last slide to go up and wrap up the panel discussion. Thank you so much to our amazing speakers for sharing your insights today. I think this was a really rich session. And yeah, just to say a little bit more about upcoming webinars that are in the pipeline. So our next session will be the second part of this co-creation labs discussion, where we'll be reflecting with 4 different projects about what they've been doing, quite different work. And so different new insights will be coming out, and you'll be able to hear about lessons about collaborating and co-learning. And then that's on the 29th of June. And then another session in July that will be about linking timescale. So working at both the humanitarian, immediate crisis response, early warnings kind of timescale, up to the long-term development and climate change adaptation and resilience timeframes, and how we can do better at linking those two different timelines and not sort of working at cross purposes. So that'll be another fascinating discussion. We have some more ideas about what we will be discussing, but not dates yet. So if you want to have updates on what's happening, we will be sharing email updates with everybody on that's registered about the next in the series. And you can also go to the CLARE LinkedIn and see what we have planned. But thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a really great discussion, and I really appreciate. We had a great turnout today. Really, really good to meet some new faces in the community. So thank you very much, and we will wrap it up there. The recording will be available to everybody. We will send around the link to everyone who's registered. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.